our own John Foley yesterday has been intently tracking the first ballot voting for our own Chase Utley. Now, there's a couple ex-Phillies on this list. And, you know, Chase isn't going to get in now. He's not Adrian Beltre, where he's going to be a unanimous Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
But you can usually tell if somebody's going to get in based on how, like, the first round of voting goes. And most people that get in, I believe, get roughly around 55% or higher of the vote. And so far, right now, Chase Utley has 9 votes, so he's at 60%, which is a really good sign that he's going to get in the Hall of Fame in time. It's interesting because on one hand, you can like make the argument that he was the best of those Phillies big three. And then on another hand, you could make the case that he was like not the worst, but like the least important of the Phillies big three. So he's kind of like, he's a very interesting Hall of Fame case. I do think he's going to get in. But at times, Jimmy Rollins and Ryan Howard were more important to me as a Phillies fan than Chase Utley. I did think that Utley almost got, I don't want to say overloved in a negative way, but like he kind of shadowed Rollins and Howard more than, or overshadowed them, I think more than was deserved.
Yeah, it really comes down to that 5-year stretch. When, of course, in that time, the Phillies won the World Series, that Chase Utley was the man.
You are the man.
So it honestly is wild when you think about it because it's genius. It's peaking at the right time. It's capitalizing. You know, when the team is hottest, that he was the face of the Phillies and of baseball, was such a big name at that time. But when you look outside, you look at his whole career, that wasn't the case. And so it is a weird dynamic because I know you and Tyler, I think, see opposite sides on this in terms of Chase as a Hall of Famer.
Oh, I think he's in. I just think him being so much more in than Jimmy or Ryan.
Right.
At least Jimmy is.
Yeah.
I don't want to say wrong because I think Jimmy, I think all three of them have a really good case.
Yeah.
Ryan's obviously got cut short. But I think like Utley being the shoe-in where Jimmy Rollins is only at 13% of the vote, I see that as distorted.
Yeah, and I know Jim in the chat, we've got a Jim in the chat, Jim Cunningham talking
What
about
you say, Jim?
Chase will eventually get in, not sure about Jimmy. That
It doesn't look
Jimmy
good for
has
Jimmy.
a stronger career in your opinion. And it's wild because it really does come down to that. Like overall career versus that 5-year stretch, totally different Chases that we're talking about in terms of comparison to Jimmy. But I do think when you look at the fact that Chase Utley was such a big part of peak Phillies baseball in the World Series season and around it, that he gets in for sure. But it is weird that we're even having this conversation because it shouldn't be this difficult.
Yeah, like Jimmy, for example, only has 2 votes, which is 13.3% of the vote, compared to Chase Utley's 60% of the vote. And this is Jimmy's second year, right, Tyler? He was on it last year, I think, for the first time. So typically you have about 5 or 6 goes at it before I think there's a next qualifier on it. But to see that difference, like Jimmy was a better fielder to me. Like Jimmy played the hardest position on the field and did it better than anyone during his time, or as good as anyone in his time. And I don't think you can say that about Utley defensively. But when you look at the second baseman WAR stats, Utley was the best of that decade, more or less. So, you know, it's interesting. It's something to track. I know our own John Foley's always on it when he sees the updates of votes. And this vote that was made public yesterday was ballot number 15 from Peter Bate. If I'm mispronouncing that, I'm sorry. But the other ex-Phillies on the list, Billy Wagner now has 11 votes, which is 73.3%. So it's looking like Billy Wagner should get in the Hall of Fame, which completely agree with. Bobby Abreu only has 3 votes still for 20%. So it's not looking good for Abreu and Rollins, but I would say it's looking pretty damn good for Chase Utley and Billy Wagner.
Yeah, for sure. Now, Chase Utley's numbers, just in perspective, overall, in the 5 years, his numbers from 2005 2009, hitting 301, 388, 535, averaging 39 doubles, 29 homers, 101 RBIs, and 111 runs scored. And of course, defensively at that time was solid as well. And then that was peak Chase. Overall, his numbers are a little bit different to say the least, but not far off. He was 275, 358, 465, and then had a total of, for home runs, 259, which averaged about 15 per season. But, when you look at the overall picture, those 5 years catapulted Chase in terms of even being in this conversation, not only as a Hall of Famer, but I know what we're going to hit on as well, Jamie, of one of the best second basemen of all time, that Chase Utley is in these conversations of greatest in his position, but even, of course, in terms of being a Hall of Famer. And it's remarkable because when you really think about that World Series team, Chase Utley is the guy. But when you think about overall bigger picture and you take a step back, his numbers outside of that 5-year stretch were solid, but he was the man in those 5 years, which is why we're even having this conversation.